Greetings all, and welcome to Esoteric Babble. Today's babbling is going to continue our series on the teachings of Yeshua, and we will be plunging headfirst into the Beatitudes. For those of you, the very, very few of you, who have listened to these babblings, you will already know that I am not the most succinct of expositors. So in an effort to keep these videos from becoming monstrously long, today we'll begin with some background information on the first Beatitude. Then in a separate video, we will begin the first Beatitude proper. Now, there is so much to be said that not everything can be said for one Beatitude, even in hours and hours. So I know things will be left out. And I really encourage you, dear listener, let me know what I've overlooked, and please share any and all insights that you have. So before we dive straight into this first Beatitude, we should mention that the Beatitudes form the first part of the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount, to give it a little context, if we go back a little bit into Matthew chapter 4, we will find that Yeshua, a report of Yeshua's doings and teachings have spread around. And consequently, a crowd has come out from Jerusalem, from Galilee, from across the Jordan, and has started following him. And this verb can work on a couple different levels. They began to follow him literally, and figuratively, they began to be guided by his teaching. So that's all in Matthew chapter 4. We will now pick up with idon de tus ojos anebe esto oros. So actually we have to go back to Matthew 4:17 for the subject here, which is Jesús, Yeshua, Jesus. After he saw the crowd, or when he saw the crowd, he went up onto the mountain. Kai kathi santos autou, proselthan auto, hoi mathetai autou. So we have a little genitive absolute here, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Now this definitely calls to mind something like students going to a guru or a great master or enlightened teacher. Certainly in Buddhism, we find very often Yena Bhagava Tain Upasankami. Someone approached the Blessed One. Kai anoixas to stoma autou edidasken autus legon. And opening his mouth, he began to teach them, saying. So notice here, Jesus is seated. His disciples have come. They are, I'm sure, seated around him. And then there is a crowd down below. We said mountain before. We don't have to think of like the Himalayas or the Rocky Mountains. This could be, and most likely is, some type of hilltop. So the interesting thing to keep in mind here is that the disciples of Jesus are close to him, and then there is this crowd a little further away. Now, we might look at this and think that perhaps this is indicative of the fact that Jesus has an esoteric teaching and an exoteric teaching. So there's a teaching that the group around him, the quote inner circle, will receive, and there's a teaching that the masses will receive. And I think that's close to it. I think what this is sort of representing is that many spiritual teachers, and we will take the Buddha as a very good example, meet people where they are. And so, for instance, if we think about the Buddha, he would encounter samanas, people who had actually gone into the homeless life, seeking liberation, seeking out the holy life. He would meet hereditary priests. He would meet householders who had families and, jobs and duties like that. So that is, I think, what's going on here. And the idea is that these different groups of people are going to understand the teaching differently. That's why it might seem like there's an esoteric and an exoteric. I don't think it's so much that the esoteric is being held back. It's simply that the masses, or the people who first come to a teaching like this, hear it in its broadest, maybe most literal sense, and then upon further reflection, they understand the deeper levels. Spiritual teachings have many, many levels. And we always want to remind ourselves of that, because we always want to seek out a deeper level. And what we said about the Buddha before, and this would have been true, this was obviously true in ancient India, there were people who went into the, quote, homeless life, these samanas, these ascetics. That's what the disciples did. That's what Jesus did. They gave up everything and they wandered around. They didn't have jobs. They didn't have homes. They didn't have money. They subsisted on alms. And now, before we go on to the actual first beatitude, let's remind ourselves that formal Christianity does not come along for some decades, if not centuries. The form that we kind of get with the Nicene Creed and all of that jazz does not come for quite a while. So even though we could read it as Jesus talking to talking to Christians and then non-Christians, I think that's not the best way to understand this. I think Jesus, Yeshua, is giving us a teaching. He's not really interested in trying to get a huge group of followers. And you'll notice going forward here, he does not say in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are those who believe that I am God, that I was crucified for your sins," etc., etc. There is nothing like that found here. Again, this teaching was delivered for all people. And when you consider that fact, you'll start to understand that it's very much at odds with a lot of standard Christian dogma, doctrine, teachings. And we'll just leave that right there for now.